quote, Jeffrey Epstein is dead, Ghislaine Maxwell is not, end quote. That is how Ghislaine Maxwell's opening her argument against the Trump administration's push to unseal some of the grand jury transcripts. In a new filing today, her attorneys write this, quote, whatever interest the public may have in Epstein, that interest cannot justify a broad intrusion into grand jury secrecy in a case where the defendant is alive, her legal options are viable, and her due process rights remain, end quote. Maxwell is appealing her sex trafficking conviction and has asked the Supreme Court to take her case. She argues that releasing this grand jury information, which she hasn't even seen, could prejudice a potential retrial. As that happens, the Justice Department is weighing releasing a transcript of the interview that they conducted with the former Epstein accomplice last month. Senior administration sources telling CNN that some within the White House worry that releasing a transcript would cause this story to once again dominate headlines. That seems fair. That seems like a fair worry. This morning, the House Oversight Committee issued a subpoena to the DOJ for all of its files related to Epstein, and it sent nearly a dozen other subpoenas to individuals for closed-door depositions beginning this month. On that list, both Democrats and Republicans, including Bill and Hillary Clinton, James Comey, Robert Mueller, Bill Barr, Jeff Sessions, and others. Our panel is going to be here to weigh in. And we're going to get started with CNN Chief Legal Affairs Correspondent Paula Reed and CNN Senior White House Correspondent Kristen Holmes. Kristen, let me start with you. You and Paula have been reporting on the Trump administration's internal debate about whether they're going to release this transcript of Maxwell's interview. Again, this was with the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche. Can you take us inside the White House's thinking here?
Yeah, Casey, I mean, this is coming at a time where the White House has been under intense scrutiny, not just by Democrats, not just by Republicans, but even some of Trump's most staunch allies have been pushing back, saying that there's been a lack of transparency when it comes to the issue of Epstein, when it comes to the document release in the Epstein case. So this would give these White House officials, this would give the White House some kind of credence, and this is what I'm being told by people in the inside, to say that we are being transparent, that we're going to release this transcript, we're going to release potentially snippets of audio from this lengthy interview. We are told there was roughly more than 10 hours of audio between several days of this sit-down interview. And when I'm talking to these various sources, they say this. One thing is clear, it's not going to be the whole thing. They know that they're going to have to, and they already have been, going through, looking at sensitive information, making redactions. But the other part of this is they're having a conversation with the Department of Justice. And right now it's unclear if the White House and the Department of Justice are on the same page on releasing this. The White House, they want to be on the offensive when it comes to whatever information they have regarding Jeffrey Epstein, because they've spent the better part of the last several months, or at least since that DOJ memo came out, on the defensive. And that's not a place that's good for President Trump or for the White House. They do better when they are fighting, not when they are receiving the fight. So this would give them the opportunity to get ahead of a narrative. Whether or not they're going to actually do this, though, they have been warned by some experts that there are risks here. It remains to be seen how they're going to handle it.
All right. Paula, so in the request to the judge that's overseeing the possible release of grand jury transcripts, this is what Maxwell's attorney wrote, right? Quote, Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is not. We've read it a couple of times now. Tell us more about what they're arguing here.
Well, that is all true. And here, the Justice Department has argued that this grand jury material, which is by default confidential, should be unsealed because of the enormous public interest in this case. Now, Maxwell's lawyer has previously said that they would oppose this move, but a short time ago in his filing with the court, he's revealing more about why they believe that is the case. He's saying, quote, public curiosity is insufficient when Maxwell's legal and reputational interests are at stake. These factors weigh heavily in favor of preserving the secrecy of the grand jury materials. The reputational harm from releasing incomplete, potentially misleading grand jury testimony untested by cross-examination would be severe and irrevocable. So there he is specifically referring to the grand jury process. It's different than a trial. In a grand jury, a prosecutor goes before grand jurors, presents a case. The threshold for indictment is much lower than it is in a courtroom, and there's no defense put on. Now, of course, Maxwell was tried in a court of law. She was convicted of sex trafficking, but this is part of why the bar is so high to release this kind of information. Now, Casey, I also want to note the judge has given victims of Maxwell and Epstein the chance to weigh in here. Notably, we've heard from two of them. They didn't oppose the release of this material. They push for more transparency as long as victims are protected, and they have until the end of the day today to weigh in with their thoughts.
All right, Paula Reed, Kristen Holmes, thank you both very much for getting us started. Our panel is now here in the arena. CNN political analyst, White House correspondent for the New York Times, Solon Cano-Youngs. CNN political analyst, national political reporter for Axios, Alex Thompson. CNN political commentators, Kate Bedingfield and Brad Todd are here. And we're also joined by CNN senior legal analyst, Ellie Honig. Thank you guys all for being here today. Ellie, let me start with you for your kind of perspective on this. I mean, it does seem as though, you know, if Ghislaine Maxwell is looking for fair treatment, that perhaps she does have an argument here. But at the same time, from a political perspective, she's not exactly a sympathetic figure. What say you?
Yeah, not at all sympathetic, Casey, but whether you or I like it or not, the position legally taken by Ghislaine Maxwell, an attorney, is completely reasonable and appropriate. Remember, the job of Ghislaine Maxwell and her attorney is only one thing: to protect the legal interests of Ghislaine Maxwell. They are not concerned about the politics of this. They're not concerned about transparency. They're not concerned about what the public wants to know. The only job here is to protect Ghislaine Maxwell's interests. And to that end, Ghislaine Maxwell does still have a live pending appeal. As you said earlier, she's trying to get the Supreme Court to take her case. It's a long shot, but it's possible. And so the lawyer has to think about, well, if we win, she might get a new trial. And in that case, naturally, he would not want this grand jury material out there for the public. Now, interestingly, the lawyer for Ghislaine Maxwell was not allowed to review all of this testimony. So all that he knows is it's bad for his client because it was used to indict her in the first place. And so he's doing the right thing here as a defense lawyer in objecting to this public production.
So, Ellie, just a quick follow on that. I mean, some of this is clearly playing out in the public eye, right? A lot of this is about Ghislaine Maxwell, the Trump administration, trying to curry favor with the president, or at least figure out some way to get her to be treated better because the administration needs or wants something from her. Are those two interests in conflict, like what you just laid out, and then the public piece of this?
Yeah, that's interesting, because if Maxwell's team calculates, well, we want to please the president, we want to please the administration. Why? Because they want a pardon. I mean, they've said that in writing in their legal briefs. This position might not please the administration. In fact, they're in opposition to DOJ here, because DOJ is arguing that this should be released. So there's a couple different calculations, complicated legal calculations here going on. But I think Maxwell's goal is to either please the president enough to get a pardon, or please DOJ enough to have DOJ go to a judge and ask for a lower sentence. But you're right, Casey. I mean, by opposing this, they have put themselves on the opposite side of the administration.
And probably on the opposite side of some of the president's most fervent supporters. Let's be real about that. I mean, Brad Todd, the other big question here that we're talking about is whether this conversation between Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's former personal attorney, now the number 2 at the Department of Justice, it's all on tape. They're thinking about putting it out. You're a Republican strategist. Are you interested in having them put that out there?
I'm agnostic. To tell you the truth. You know, I am tired of talking about this case every other day on television, because there's so many more important things that affect every American's life out there. But I do get that we're going to talk about it until something comes out, right? I don't know if we'll stop at that point, but that's what's going to happen. And so if what comes out is Todd Blanche's transcript, then maybe that will be done.
But is it fair that the only reason we are talking about it is because Donald Trump, Mr. President, promises made, promises kept, promised to make these files public, and he hasn't?
Well, I think probably history, when this is all over with, we're going to look back and say, you know, what they should have said was, we'll release it as soon as we can, right? As soon as we legally can.
January 19th, 2029.
Well, until the grand jury has need for it to be secret has run its course, right? Until we legally can. That might have been the mistake that was made.
I think the problem they're going to have here, I mean, there's certainly all of the legal calculations that Ellie was talking about, but you know, purely from a communications perspective, releasing the likely somewhat redacted, if it's ultimately released, grand jury testimony, releasing the perhaps selectively redacted transcript of the conversation with Todd Blanche, doesn't meet the bar that Donald Trump himself set out at the beginning of this conversation, shall we call it, which is releasing the files, making them public. So from a communications perspective, I'm not sure you can argue reasonably that either of these releases is going to shut this down. It doesn't meet Donald Trump's bar for shutting it down.
And it's not just Donald Trump promising to release them. It's also the people he brought into his administration that set these expectations so high by riling the base, by talking about this issue. Deputy Director of the FBI, Kash Patel as well, coming in. So they set these expectations high, and now you're seeing them meet that pressure at this time. It's interesting because a couple weeks ago, most of the people you talked to in the White House were like, we need to move on from this. It seems like in recent days that you've seen now a White House that's like, you know, we both want to move on from this to talk about the domestic policy package they just passed, but also their base has not given up on this.